of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. Pursuant to the motion of the House of June 18, 2025, the committee is meeting to study the impact of the criteria for awarding federal funding on research excellence in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I would ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our amazing interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card, which links to a short awareness video. I would like to make few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Today, for this panel, I would like to welcome our witnesses. We are joined by Dr. Wendy Sukier, Professor, Entrepreneurship and Strategy, Ted Rogers School of Management and Academic Director, Diversity Institute. Christopher Demet, Professor, Canadian Studies, Trent University, and he's joining by video conference. Yves Genras is Scientific Director, Observatory of Science and Technology, Université de Quebec, Montreal. And we are joined by Dr. Mahaido Sokai from IDEA STEM Consulting Incorporation. He's the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Scientific Officer. We will start our panel today with Dr. Mahaido Sokai to make sure that all our witnesses can fully participate in this meeting. I would kindly ask the members who will address the witnesses to please first identify themselves. You will have 5 minutes, Dr. Sukai, for your opening remarks. Floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Committee members, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you. Federal research funding plays a critical role in sustaining Canada's science, technology, innovation, and research enterprise, in building our nation and in positioning Canada on the world stage. Hopefully, we all agree that research funding is intended to be awarded to research initiatives that have the greatest potential to expand human knowledge, increase our understanding of the world, our society, and the intersection between the two, and/or have significant potential for benefit. I am a scientist, a researcher, an accessibility and inclusion strategist and thought leader with a perspective rooted in lived, living, and professional experience. I'm a geneticist with expertise in genomics, experimental therapeutics, diagnostics, population data science, and public health research, and have led research on the accessibility of higher education and employment, accessibility of STEM, research and research training, and in organizational and systemic cultures of accessibility and inclusion. Today, I serve as Chief Operating and Chief Scientific Officer of IDEA STEM, an organization dedicated to inclusion and participation of persons with disabilities in STEM and healthcare education, research, and career. I want to reframe the discourse on the importance of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility in science and research. Imagine for a moment the life-saving medical device that isn't certified safe for use by millions of Canadians because the scientists developing it did not know enough to make a survey that was accessible to persons with disabilities. Imagine a study with potential to greatly influence policy on aging in place, yet because of its structure, the community intended to benefit cannot participate. Imagine a harmful genetic variant in a cancer patient that goes misclassified because we do not collect essential data about the patient or because the reference population data set reflects the wrong ethnic or geographic segment of humanity. And imagine a study to assess the impact of COVID-19 on employment experiences, but we can't learn about disabled workers because nobody asked the disability screening question. These are not hypothetical scenarios, nor are they rare. Over the course of my career, I've encountered each of them in some form, and all could have been avoided. A research grant application lays out the research questions, rationale, potential for benefit, hypotheses, approaches, methods, anticipated outcomes. Thought is given to contingencies, limitations, sources of bias, and potential next steps. And each component is itself a part of the research lifecycle. Proposals involving human research participants are reviewed by research award panels and research ethics committees, which is a crucial step in the check and balance of identifying excellence in research and in determining which research avenues to fund. But what if I told you that those real-life scenarios that I described passed through ethics and funding review and were approved? That tells me that there were failure modes at multiple points in the research life cycle in those projects, not identified by researchers, ethics, or funding panels. Likeliest is that all parties did not know what they did not know and didn't think to ask anybody who might be able to assist. Or someone raised the possibility of limitations in project scope because of these failure modes, and they were voted down. Application of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility principles throughout the research life cycle by way of asking rational, reflective questions about these failure modes would have avoided each of those scenarios that I described. Having diverse lived experiences, perspectives, and ways of thought on the team, and an environment where those voices are heard and cultivated would have done that as well. So too would have diverse perspectives in funding panels and ethics committees. Perhaps then research excellence isn't about novelty and innovation of the idea and approach. It's also about how well these approaches are executed and how much they anticipate and counter sources of bias, the complement of skills, characteristics, and perspectives brought to the table. Perhaps asking about equity, diversity, and inclusion plans and research proposals actually is not effective because this isn't about EDI. It's about how we do the best, highest quality, most rigorous research. Equity is central to excellence, and inclusive science simply is better science. Therefore, we need to mandate inclusive research design and research endeavors, facilitating identification and minimization of bias. Re-engineer our research evaluation frameworks to ensure we're adequately assessing for inclusive research design. Embed ethical and societal impact training and inclusive research training in our undergraduate and graduate curricula. Invest in intentional pathway programs to strengthen the research ecosystem, and rigorously audit EDI initiatives to ensure they are positioned to foster research excellence. I emphasize again, equity and excellence are not in conflict. They are mutually reinforcing. I urge this committee to strengthen, not weaken, EDI considerations in research funding criteria to ensure that Canadian science remains globally competitive, ethically grounded, and socially responsible. IdeaSTEM stands ready to work together.
If you can please wind up, your time is up, please.
IdeaSTEM stands ready to work together with you and the research ecosystem by contributing further evidence, lived expertise, and policy guidance. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will proceed to Mr. Christopher Dimmitt, the professor from Canadian Studies, Trent University, and he's joining us by video conference. Mr. Dimmitt, you will have 5 minutes. You can please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here. I was happy to be here at the committee late last November, and I'm happy to be back. I think I'm here to speak to a survey, a report that I did with a data scientist, Zachary Patterson at Concordia University last year, where we surveyed the political opinions of professors across the country, their attitudes towards academic freedom and diversity issues, and we did a report based on that survey. What our main finding was that the federal research and funding agencies are ignoring the most important and most significant diversity problem in higher education, and that problem relates to viewpoint diversity. It might seem that this could be a partisan statement, but I want to emphasize that this is just an accurate description based on the data. Our survey found that when one looks at professors' voting patterns, Based on the 2021 election, fully 76% of professors voted for the NDP or the Liberal Party. Only 7.6% voted for the Conservative Party. When we asked professors their self-reported political beliefs, fully 88% identified as being on the left. This is, of course, significantly different from the wider population, and I want to suggest to the committee that if the results, if the skew on this kind of issue was similar for really any other metric of diversity, it would be considered a national crisis. It might be tempting to dismiss this as an issue only for conservative scholars, and I certainly think it's true that we have found lots of evidence of self-censorship on part of those scholars and concerns for their careers. But I want to emphasize that we also had evidence from centrist and even progressive scholars who differed from colleagues on certain kinds of issues who also reported this as a major problem. But I also want to suggest to you that the problem of the lack of viewpoint diversity in our universities damages the core mission of universities itself, and it brings the mission of universities and Canadian universities into disrepute. How does this work in practice? It reduces the effectiveness of peer review. Peer review depends on having the best experts analyze claims to truth, to knowledge, and if we are excluding a series of viewpoints from the peer review, this is a significant problem. Whether it's live policy debates on housing, addiction, crime, or whether it's just questions about Canadian history and literature, that this is a major issue. I would ask those in the committee to think about what they would think of research that came from a population of scholars who were all thought like those on, say, the Cato Institute or a MAGA think tank like America First Policy Institute. Would you trust that research? I would say, of course you wouldn't, nor should you. For those in the political minority universities, our report found pretty significant problems. There was a high rates of self-censorship, in other words, not speaking on issues, not researching on issues, avoiding issues. Almost half of conservative scholars reported that they were frightened of even having their colleagues know that they were conservative. This is obviously a major issue. We're also talking about the problem of group polarization in communities where people tend to all think alike. What tends to happen in those kinds of groups, whether we're talking about juries or in the university world, people tend to skew, even if they come in with having more moderate viewpoints, the lack of those who challenge those ideas tends to have the overall opinion on the group skew towards one area in particular and become more radicalized than any individual would have been when they came in. Finally, I think what the issue is that current federal EDI policies in research and in the Canada Research Chairs not only don't deal with this issue, they probably make it worse. The demand for diversity statements is a classic example of a kind of systemic discrimination. It's a policy that intends to be and probably wants to be neutral, but actually embeds within it, in practice, forms of political discrimination. Mostly because in practice it tends to prioritize certain versions of EDI and not others. This isn't about not allowing discrimination. It's about essentially in practice discriminating against kind of colorblind approaches to EDI. What's more, often programs, research or otherwise that are, say, trying to target certain kinds of identity groups often get paired with much more politicized readings, which then skew the research funding program towards certain political viewpoints, eliminating others from the outset. This is obviously a significant problem. We only have to look south of the border right now to think about the problem of what the lack
sorry for interrupting. If you can please wind up, your time is up.
Absolutely. Obviously, we have to look south of the border to see what the major problems when higher education lacks the public trust.
Sorry, I will have to end you here, and we will now proceed to Dr. Wendy Sukhir. Dr. Sukhir, you can go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thanks very much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship and strategy. I'm a former vice president of research and innovation. I've served on a number of selection committees at various levels, and I have 30 years experience as a researcher, peer reviewer, and chair of many committees. I really have 3 points today. The first is that Canada is changing, and any research on the Canadian population has to reflect these changes. It's also worth noting we recently did a survey with Environics of 5,000 Canadians across the country. 56% believe the current focus on equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility is a good thing. 27% were neutral, and only 16% thought it was a bad thing. So I think we need to make sure that we're not swayed by a lot of the anti-EDI discourse that flows over the border. Second point is, and this really confirms what Dr. Sukai said, excellence in research requires an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens in the design and implementation of research projects, or we put Canada's prosperity, lives, and well-being at risk. And finally, great minds don't think alike, and homogeneity often leads to groupthink. There are many ways of knowing, and different research traditions, approaches, methods are needed to produce high-quality research. We also need disciplinary and demographic diversity. So just a few points to elaborate on that, and I will submit a written brief after. When I talk about shifts in the Canadian population, a third of the workforce is now racialized. 27% identify as having a disability. Women are now the majority of university graduates. They own 20% of businesses, are joint owners in 17% more. And their 20% businesses contribute $90 billion to the Canadian economy and account for about 1 million jobs. So if you ignore gender in economic development strategies and entrepreneurship and innovation, you're losing out. We also know that obviously Indigenous people have constitutional rights, and Indigenous youth are the fastest growing segment of the population. So Canada is changing. From our perspective, and I'm in a business school, we focus on how equity, diversity, and inclusion supports business goals and objectives. We know that survey research, many of you know polling, for example. If survey research is not disaggregated by gender, by region, by age, and so on, it doesn't tell us what's really going on. We know with health research, not disaggregating data and bringing a gender and diversity lens results in, for example, COVID vaccination strategies that resulted in very high infection rates for certain segments of the population. Some of you may be familiar with Kwame McKenzie's research that showed in Toronto, the Black community had 9 times the infection rate of the white community. And it was when they brought an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens to the public health strategies, they were able to reduce that to comparable levels. That is a perfect example of where bringing an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens to research resulted in saving lives. And there are lots more examples, whether we look at genomics research, whether we look at car safety systems, for example. It became clear that women were more likely to be injured and killed because car safety research used male crash test dummies. So fundamentally, the kinds of things that CIHR is building in to research design requirements is critical, in my view, to excellence. And my PhD is in information systems. When we look at artificial intelligence, if you don't bring gender and diversity lens, you embed bias and do more harm than good. And there's lots and lots of examples that I will bring to that. I can answer in questions. As a result, we know that diverse perspectives are critically important to research. And when you are trying to engage with diverse populations, having teams that are also diverse strengthens not only the innovation and multiple perspectives, but the ability to engage with certain segments of the population. We also know that disciplinary diversity is really important, and one of the big failures in Canada, the gap between our research excellence and our innovation, for instance, I would argue is an overemphasis on science, technology, engineering, and math, and a lack
Sorry
of
for
emphasis
interrupting, if you can please.
on innovation. And I'm happy to talk more about it. My conclusions are very similar to Dr. Sakai's.
Thanks a lot. We will now proceed to Yves Generous. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I'm here to try to respond to the impact of factors or criteria for selection of these research projects. How do these criteria affect the results? I've been working for over 40 years in the intersection, to use a popular word, research evaluation and a transformation of universities, the context. So I would like it to function properly, but it's not necessarily the case. What does scientific research indicate? If we're to look at the link between excellence and the criteria, what is excellence? So the three tri-agencies themselves say that they are financing MA, PhD for world caliber innovation, scientific thinking, etc. We find this on all their web pages. So we're looking for researchers, specialists. Today's problem, other than as in the 60s, it's goal displacement. In other words, we contort a bit what the mission is. The funders up at the 90s were telling us that their mission is to support researchers. Now, we find a new EDI that becomes a basic criteria, whether it's for population, social class and status, gender. And this is a confusion of what the mission is. Within a government, there are a number of departments, one for the environment and another one for industry. If we were to ask the Minister of Industry and the mission of the Environment Minister, the Industrial Minister would be completely blocked from doing what he feels is his mandate. They are two contradictory. Now, when you put together for the same project, it's going to fail. EDI is the same thing. These are affirmations. We're confounding methodology. All university researchers know that samples don't have, if the sample doesn't have a women represented, then we're going to get skewed results. And this is known by researchers ever since the establishment of the funding formulas from the early 90s. If you concentrate on excellence, anything associated as a criteria for excellence is yet to be defined. I've submitted excellence is a tautology. How do we attain and measure that excellence? Well, excellence is what I think is excellent. So at the NSERC, 70% of the projects from researchers are claimed to be excellent. They're excellent. No university professor is hired unless because he's mediocre. No, they're all excellent. So that's the university context. So we have to be careful of not confusing all of these various objectives. It should be to support those who are hired by universities and are, in fact, excellent. Let's do some empirical research. We need data which indicates what the percentage of success or failure is as an outcome of this support. If we want to have criteria, financing criteria, funding criteria, it has to be with results. If we want to encourage indigenous personnel to look for employment in the universities, we have to remember that they need to be excellent. So we have to encourage those people at the university, but not to confound the criteria with ideas that are just not in keeping with our thinking.
Now start with our first round of questioning, and we will start with MP Baldinelli for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us this morning. I just want to follow up. There was one comment that was made about the notion of wanting to avoid embedding bias. And Mr. Dummett, I'm going to follow up with you. I mean, you had talked about how critically important the peer review system is. And you actually appeared in November 28th of 2024. And you had mentioned federal funding agencies, federal research agencies, and the Canada Research Program are at the moment ignoring the single biggest and most egregious diversity problem in higher education. And that is the notion of viewpoint diversity. And then you went on to mention, I think that the lack of viewpoint diversity significantly damages the purpose of higher education, which I greatly support. So how can viewpoint diversity advance research excellence in Canada?
Thanks for the question. And I would like to say, I suppose I said something similar to the first and third witnesses as well, talking about, at its best point, peer review depends on a wide range of experts assessing the material for what it is, and if you don't have a diverse viewpoint, then it's a significant problem. You're not getting an actual complete analysis of the material, and in reality, right now, that's not happening in the university sector. The Canada Research Chairs Program, the federal funding agencies are essentially ignoring the reality that there's an incredible skew in who makes up the population of peer reviewers, of university researchers. It's not even, as far as I can tell, on the radar. And secondly, as I was saying, the second half of my comments, the current practices of EDI funding and other programs are actually making the political skew much worse.
You went on, and there was a quote from your previous testimony, and I bring it up again because, unfortunately, during that day of hearings, there were a lot of technical issues, so a lot of testimony was missed at certain periods. So I just wanted to follow up because I found it quite interesting. I mean, during that time, you actually quote John Stuart Mill, who said, "He who knows only his side of the case knows little." So, I mean, is viewpoint diversity right now a funding criteria by the tri-councils in federal research funding?
I don't believe it is. I don't see it there. Maybe there's someone who could see it. It certainly doesn't come up as a criteria in the training materials that I've seen. It doesn't seem to be an issue that when the panels are deciding who gets to assess this material, it's not a category which is being promoted by the Canada Research Chairs Program or federal funding agencies at all. Even despite the fact that as our research shows, the political skew in higher education is worse than really almost any other category of identity that the federal funding agencies are tracking.
That testimony on that day, Mr. Eric Kaufman also appeared, and he proposed a solution. And he talked about, I would like to see the councils get ahead of the problem and move to a colorblind merit approach. Remove political criteria such as mandatory diversity statements. These are not universal consensus values. They are partisan values, and every survey will show a big partisan gap on these questions. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I'd like to emphasize that I think it's a false choice between accounting for diversity and the way it's currently being operated. I think excellent research design, and here I'd agree with my fellow witnesses, excellent research design must account for the diversity of the population for different ways it will affect different parts of the population. I think it's a false choice between having EDI and not having EDI. I think research design has to account for that. But I think that the agencies must be aware of the way in which current policies are framed interprets and mandates and embeds a partisan interpretation of what EDI means in practice.
think you're correcting that. I mean, going back to the statement of, or the testimony of November 28th, we also had Dr. Jeremy Kerr, and he mentioned about diversity of views or diverse backgrounds. That's not to say it's not important. And he says when he's looking for people to include in my research group, the last thing I'm trying to do is make everybody like me. So that's critically important. But also, you know, in terms of the whole viewpoint, diversity, when we look at these projects, would you not agree?
I think it absolutely should be on the agenda. The problem is partly the pipeline. The problem is the population of professors is so skewed already that work should be done up and down the system to make sure that there's just a much wider range of Canadians, a much more representative range of Canadians who are recruited and hired as experts and as professors in the higher education system.
To that point, and just last question, you had mentioned in previous testimony that you said DEI policies often punish small institutions in underrepresented regions. Can you expand on that?
I'm trying to remember what I said there. Sorry if I can't recall exactly. I think, in a sense, if you're at a university like I am, Trent University, the CRC program, for example, wants the population of our Canada research chairs to represent the Canadian population. And if you look around the city of Peterborough, which is becoming more diverse, but it looks quite different than Toronto. It's just not. It's not. The community is different than it would be somewhere else. And I think maybe the kind of people who are willing to move here are slightly different. So if it's based on a kind of national level, then it's kind of skewing against a kind of communities. They're just different. From the kind of wider national trends. Perhaps that's what I was referring to.
Thank you, and I think that's pretty well my time, right, Madam Chair?
6 seconds.
Thank you. I'll cede my time.
Okay. Thank you. We will now proceed to MP Jessic for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. From what I've heard so far this morning, I do detect that there is agreement that EDI is useful in terms of the design of the study that is being proposed. There are also some comments related to the team involved should perhaps reflect diversity of the Canadian population. You have all heard Professor Dummett make comments related to the political views of researchers, academics in general, and his desire in some way to perhaps rebalance that particular point of view with perhaps a more conservative point of view being considered when EDI criteria are being looked at. Dr. Sukai, how do you respond to that particular proposal?
Madam Chair, thank you very much for the question. First of all, I think how we think about viewpoints and how we talk about viewpoints can encompass all sorts of things. It can encompass diversity in ways of thought. So we can bring in the conversation around neurodivergent persons, for example. It includes diversity of opinion, diversity of perspective, and yes, to Professor Dummett's point, it does include diversity of politics. I think what we need to think about is cause and effect. And so are we in a world where someone who is more likely to vote left goes to post-secondary institutions, goes for education, goes through graduate training, goes into the academia? Or are we in a world where actually going into post-secondary education shapes some of our perspectives in those spaces, and life experiences shape some of our perspectives in those spaces? And I think if it's the former, then how do we actually balance that conversation and that perspective among all of the other perspectives that need to be balanced becomes a conversation we need to have. If we're in a world where our life experiences shape our viewpoints, then as we would say in the sciences, that becomes much more difficult potentially to control for, right? And in any kind of work, I think the way that we control for this sort of thing is by acknowledging that it is a point of diversity, by capturing that diversity in our documentation as we think about the work that we do, and we factor it in because it is entirely possible, as Professor Dummett said, that political viewpoint does lead to bias, right? It leads to a perspective, and that perspective in order to be addressed, it does need to be open and on the table, right? And so I might answer the question by suggesting that that what we need is transparency of viewpoint and perspective, and we need to create a world where that transparency is welcome and that transparency is acceptable, right? And that brings us back to what do we need to do to build an inclusive team.
Thank you. And thank you for using the term transparency, because what we've heard at this committee is that on applications, apparently there is some use of buzzwords to satisfy EDI requirements, that there's a sort of a convention now that applicants feel that they must address EDI issues. So perhaps, Dr. Kukier, could you respond in a way, how do you see through potential buzzwords being used as opposed to a genuine approach to acknowledging EDI?
I might frame it slightly differently. What I would say is, and I've reviewed enough applications to know this, what we see are a lot of performative exercises in writing proposals. So as you said, someone thinks, oh, this is going to be screened for EDI, so I better make up some EDI stuff, as opposed to genuinely looking at the research questions and asking, does this research have different implications for women? Does this research have different implications for people living in rural communities? Does this research have different implications for racialized people, Indigenous peoples, and so on? So I do think we see, and we see it as well with GBA plus analysis within the government, that some departments have really embraced it as a way to improve their service to Canadians, and others treat it more as a checkbox. So I do think it's an issue that has to be addressed. I did want to just add a couple of comments, if I may, on the issue of diversity within academia, because I'm in a business school, and I think, and my university has a lot of professional schools, engineering, big engineering school, big business school. So I would argue that it skews very differently in terms of politics compared to a smaller university that has a liberal arts focus. And I think that's really important to recognize, that there are certain disciplinary traditions that probably also relate to some of the ideological perspectives that shape evidence. But I did want to come back to my opening comments, which is the vast majority of Canadians, believe that the focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion is appropriate, and a very small percentage feel that it isn't.
How much time is that? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dennett, you have raised your hand. Any?
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to have a point of clarification.
Okay, so we will
specifically.
I think when you get to the question, you can answer that. We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonker. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes.
Présidente, je salue les témoins qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui pour cette étude. Mes premières questions.
I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing today, but Monsieur Gingras, you told us that excellence is a rather rhetorical term. The research program right now and its funding is based on excellence. So perhaps they're excellent because they managed to succeed in getting funding. Well, no, it's a tautology. If you need criteria for funding, you have to take a look at what the training was of these researchers. We're talking about chairs for research chairs. I've seen who was 14 years in the chair for research in excellence in history. Now, these chairs is very exceptional. This is, let's say, reserved to world-respected specialists. So in sociological terms, the probability that in 2010 a research chair, a senior one, he's not an associate professor here. You still you can attain a certain degree of expertise, but senior research chair is something else. So the discussion that you're having here, it confuses the whole thing. Are we talking about associate professors, full professors? I have a position of senior chair of research. I've been judged as a world-renowned expert by the panel that evaluated my CV. Sociological studies have shown that you can change committees and you still, over 40 years, get your funding. When Canada is talking about inclusive excellence, value, scientific value, and community or social contribution. Well, as I say, we say the best researchers for each of these programs. Why? Because there's not enough money to go around. All professors at university have been selected because they're good. Excellent, perhaps. 1 on 30 only succeed. So it's a very rhetorical criteria. We have limited resources, so we create committees, evaluation panels, but those are arbitrary in nature themselves. The grants are giving almost on a lottery basis. So they'll put my name down on a ticket, and number 15 is one, not me. It's just strictly numerical probability. Now, women are underrepresented, but parity and equality is not the same thing. It's it's an elective choice that they make. So it's double blind. You see the project, you don't know if it's a woman, a man, a black person, a white person. But if we have the name ahead of time, everybody knows that the results will be the same as in the past. Canada signed the San Francisco Agreement, but the evaluations are done on the basis of how many publications that an individual has had. Does this not hinder the evaluation process? Well, it's quite complex issue here. The panel is told you have to pick the very best, universally respected and known. Well, they published in the literature, naming the professional journals. Well, that's a factor of success, which means excellence. Let's do an empirical study over the course of 2 or 3 years. Let's choose randomly who we would like to hear to. We could give much more money to, rather than give 5 million to a large university. If we gave smaller sums, we could offer more grants. The more we have diverse people, not always the same candidates, well, they'll cover different topics. Biometrics does not look at scientific value for money. How do we really analyze the quality of the project? I've sat on a number of various councils of evaluations for international bodies, for example. It's the committee that decides. It's not the CEO of the organization. And if those committees are actually quite diverse. So the committee does its work. I get a file. I do a biblio survey, if you will. If you want to be a tenured professor, if you have only 1 or 2 publications over the course of 5 years, you're not going to be selected. So biodiversity is to train and find researchers for the future. So I would base my evaluation on a CV. Well, within a certain limitation, though.
Time is up, and now we will proceed to our second round of questioning, and we will start with MP Hu. MP Hu, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are for Professor Dummett. Specifically, I want to talk about public trust. And we know that public trust has a lack of public trust in our public institutions amongst Canadians have been increasing throughout the years. And it's also correlated with the implementation of liberal top-down policies over the years, and it's no wonder it's also gotten worse. And I think I read a report the other day that it's an all-time high in 2025. The lack of public trust in our institutions is an all-time high amongst Canadians. So I just want you to expand on that generally, or specifically about in the settings of universities and colleges and the granting of federal funding.
Thanks. I should say, like a lot of my colleagues who are being witnesses before you today, I want to live in a world where there's a high public trust in higher education and universities and to allow us to do our work. But I think we all know that public trust is eroding in a series of institutions from media to various kinds of expertise. And the point of the testimony that I'm offering to you today is that while I don't want there to be a lack of public trust, I can sympathize and see why there is a lack of public trust, especially in the population of, say, 41% of the population who voted for the Conservative Party in the last election. As they listen to experts who show up in the Globe and Mail or the CBC or wherever tell them that there's a consensus on topic X or topic Y, pick your topic, what they can know is that the expertise is just not made up of a diverse array of people that represents their viewpoints. So just like a group of African Canadians might be skeptical of a group of experts who are only white who are telling them what the truth is on a certain topic, I think it'd be crazy to think that the same would not also be true for these kinds of things. And obviously, we're living in a moment of a crisis of institutions more generally. On this problem, I think there are solutions that we can and should achieve.
And you think that lack of public trust is caused by a lack of viewpoints? Because you're like you said, when you have these so-called pundits that are so-called reflective of Canadians' viewpoints of a wide variety of spectrum, but they're not reflected, and Canadians feel like their viewpoints aren't represented in the public because of these biased panels that have a certain political skew. That's the term you used. What's the effect of that? Does that create more polarization amongst Canadians and also amongst our academic researchers as well? Does it also have an effect of radicalizing Canadians?
I think both things are true. I think it is clearly is a contributing factor toward polarization. I think others would agree with that. And if you don't trust experts, if you don't trust the institutions that are supposed to be objective and if not neutral, at least diverse, to have a kind of rigorously go through material to tell you what is true, I think that's going to lead to polarization. It's going to lead to people to look for alternative viewpoints, some of which may be credible and many which will not be credible. So I think higher education institutions have a duty, I would say, to really deal with this problem head on, see it as a major concern. And if I could just take 1 second to say, another witness mentioned that, in say business schools or engineering schools, the implication I think that this wasn't a problem. Our survey specifically looked at that, and I would say we expected that to be the case, but what we found is that it was not a significant difference. That the political skewed universities might vary slightly depending on the discipline, but it is, as I said, 88% of a representative sample of professors from across the country identify as on the left.
Yeah, and that's a lack of viewpoint diversity, and it's really troubling because the point of EDI, the D stands for diversity, and you would expect a diversity of viewpoints to come into things like business and social science, and where a diversity of viewpoints may enhance the research because you may catch things that you may not be able to catch were it not for the diversity of viewpoints. So it seems quite hypocritical and quite ironic, to be fair. And do you think that these DEI policies are potentially exclusionary and because of all the quotas that they're setting and create some kind of censorship, self-censorship and suppression of opposing views? Do you think it has that kind of effect?
I think in practice it does. I don't think it's intended to do that. I want to emphasize, I don't think the policies are intended to do that. But in practice, what happens, as I was saying in my testimony, is that it embeds a certain version of EDI in the criteria. so that scholars know that they if they believe in a kind of colorblind approach to dealing with discrimination, that just like an orchestra, you would put people behind a barrier, they would play their instrument, and people would acknowledge them for the skill they have.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Mr. Hu, so thank you. We will now proceed to MP Rana. MP Rana, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I have a sore throat today. And I'm also thankful to all the witnesses spending your beautiful time with us, and especially to discuss federal funding criteria in research excellence in Canada. My question is to you, Dr. Sukir. Thank you very much. As you mentioned in your earlier comments about beautiful engineering program of your university, I also graduated from your university in engineering. And my question is, how do you see the EDI future in the next 5 to 10 years, especially in business and technology? Thank you.
Well, as I said, from my point of view, having served as the Vice President of Research and Innovation, a lot of what has been discussed about the political bias, I have no experience with or seeing broadly within the university. What I would say I have seen based on my experience is the traditional measures, for example, of excellence, like citations, publications, research funding, tend to be discipline specific. So I can give you a good example. When I came in as the Vice President of Research and Innovation, the first thing I was presented with was a report on the best researchers at TMU. And I looked at the best researchers at TMU. They were all men, they were all in engineering. Why? Because the measure of excellence was the amount of research funding. And as you would know, faculty in engineering departments need lots of funding to do their research, whereas someone in a business school or a philosopher or history professor doesn't necessarily. So if you use research funding as the metric of excellence, you are going to exclude lots of people. And so we shifted it to say, okay, in engineering, here are the metrics. In arts and social sciences, here are the metrics. In business, we're concerned about publications in top-tier journals, but we're also interested in impact. How do we drive change? And I would say that, my personal bias, even though I've sat on a lot of the traditional academic committees, is towards impact as part of the way that we assess excellence. We know that Canada has a productivity gap. We know Canada has an innovation gap. I believe that research and evidence-based solutions can help solve some of those big problems, but we have to be thinking about not just how many publications are coming out of a research grant, how is it actually shaping policy, practice, people's attitudes and behavior. So that's where my bias comes in as a more applied researcher.
And my next question again is to you. Are there any particular innovations or technological interventions you see as promising for improving inclusion?
It's interesting because one of the areas that I've done a lot of work on over the years is technology adoption. And right now, a lot of my research is on AI and the gap between, on the one hand, Canada's excellence in AI research and Canada's lagging in AI adoption, and especially some of the ethical and other considerations. I think that there are huge opportunities to improve the efficiency of lots of things that we do at post-secondary institutions with technology. At the same time, we have to be mindful that not everything that is important can be measured with numbers. And again, if we're looking at impact, some of the tools that are available for understanding what happens to the research after it's published, I think is really promising. And we're seeing some new areas of focus that include, for example, looking at knowledge mobilization more seriously, looking at impact on certain communities, and looking at commercialization results. And I'm really interested in that broader range. And the only other thing I'll mention is I was on an OECD committee looking at rural innovation. And one of the things that we found was the traditional measures of innovation, patents, IP, stuff like that, had no relevance in rural communities, even though in agriculture we see some of the most innovative practices in the adoption of AI sensors and things like that. So I think what's really important, and this perhaps is partly what Professor Gingras was saying, is the notion of excellence. One uniform measure of excellence doesn't make any sense to me. We really have to respect fundamental research, what it's trying to accomplish. We have to also respect applied research and some of the work that's done in community colleges and everything in between.
Thank you. Time is up for MP Rana. We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonker. Please go ahead. You will have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je poursuis vers Professeur Gingras.
Thank you, Chair. The notion of the request and actually the criteria to provide professional documents and for submission will result in an imposition of mandated speech is what the result is. Mandated speech runs contrary to the Charter of Rights, Human Rights, freedom of thought. Diversity statements, one researcher went to courts, and the university backed down on requesting these statements. Now, poor versus rich, of course, it makes sense. Now, in the history of science and research, the evaluation should forbid that. Somebody has to go to Superior Court and challenge that. Diversity statements are not innocuous, and they're actually quite negative. The diversity statement is often longer than the description of process or protocols. Now, it's the government's business to ensure that we're talking about diversity, but we never talk about social class, social status. It's not the color of the skin, it's whether they are rich or poor, relatively speaking. It's an ideological position as to what is scientific research. It should be based on the quality of the project without knowing who the author is. In Nature, for example, I see it's a double blind. It's presented. I don't know who the author is. I don't know if it's a man or a woman or a person of color. If it's good, it's good. Publish it. Do you think that Canadian research is more based on self-censorship? Well, I've sat on a number of panels on that, and they say yes, but as a professor, I try to be equitable for the last 40 years. Whatever the students are, we are exclusive in university. A lot of people are not accepted by university. Is that a lack of inclusion? Well, the numbers say that EDI, it's accomplishment by ambiguity. It's a methodological.
La diversité méthodologique n'est pas la diversité sexuelle, n'est pas la diversité de race. C'est une confusion intellectuelle totale.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, this panel comes to an end. I really want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before the committee today. If there is any information which you are not able to provide today because of the lack of time, you can always send written submissions, and those will be incorporated, will be circulated to all the members. And we will incorporate them while drafting the report. So thanks a lot once again to all the witnesses for contributing today in this important topic. And with that, the meeting is suspended for a few minutes to allow for the second panel to take their place. Like to make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses for this panel. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And for this panel, we are joined by 3 witnesses. I would like to welcome our witnesses for this panel. We are joined by Dr. Jeff Horstman, Associate Professor for Chemistry and Biochemistry from Wilfrid Laurier University. We are also joined by Mr. Patanjali Kambati, Professor from McGill University, Julian Lurig, Associate Professor, University of Laval. So we will, all the witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks. We will start with Dr. Horstman, and you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This year, my long-held NSERC Discovery Grant was not renewed, not for any scientific reason, but for a political one. Specifically, I was unable to profess sufficiently enthusiastic support for the official state ideology of equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI, which one now must do to receive Tri-Council funding. Essentially, scientists must say how they will recruit diverse people and identify and address systemic barriers to inclusion. I attempted to meet these requirements by arguing that because EDI requires racial discrimination and speech restrictions, policies opposed by most Canadians, EDI is itself a barrier to inclusion. To overcome this barrier, I proposed ensuring that EDI critics feel included and that we prioritize a culture of free speech and viewpoint diversity, without which science simply cannot flourish. The NSERC Evaluation Committee obviously did not buy my interpretation of EDI. Unhelpfully, my rejection was accompanied only by the vague scolding that I did not, quote, describe an approach to recruit a diverse HQP and provide an inclusive training environment, unquote. While friendly enough, NSERC program officers couldn't tell me what this meant. Luckily, a senior administrator at my university who speaks Tri-Council could decipher this message. He relayed to me that, while I don't have to sincerely support EDI, I most certainly must give the impression that I do. Just say what needs to be said and get your money. To attract a diverse array of candidates, for example, I was told it's not enough to assume that those interested in my work will seek me out with a simple email. Instead, I must boldly proclaim my commitment to finding diversity at intersectional sanctuaries like the Campus Rainbow Center. This is puzzling advice, not least because of those struggling to find people on the internet. It seems unlikely that foremost among them are members of the gay community. Now, senior administrators are very attuned to the linguistic practices surrounding the acquisition of public funds. So this advice rings broadly true. The Tri-Council aims to tell us what to think and what to say. For skeptics, let me quote from the EDI Best Practices Guide. It says, "Systemic barriers may be unseen to those who do not experience them, but nonetheless, all individuals must recognize that systemic barriers exist." It would be charitable to describe this as pseudoscience. Reputable scientists require experimental results to be universally observable and replicable by people of other languages and cultures centuries into the future. Claiming that knowledge is invisible to some people, based on skin color, for example, is anti-science. In other words, the government requires scientists to affirm the existence of phenomena that are not empirically verifiable. To invoke Paul McCartney, it's beginning to feel like we're back in the USSR. So how has this nonsense so completely permeated Canada's research ecosystem? Well, after a few cancellations, people fall in line. Fear leads to self-censorship, and open, vigorous debate fizzles out. I've tried to discuss EDI on campus a few times with the following results. First, I was told that EDI is not debatable by two different administrators on two separate occasions. Second, I was kindly advised to stop talking about EDI because I have a family. I should think about my kids, I was told. It made me wonder, do I work for a public university or Tony Soprano? To summarize, Tri-Council EDI requirements are compelled political speech, and we find ourselves here because many have allowed themselves to be silenced. I will leave you with two broad recommendations that I believe are critical for restoring the integrity of science. The first is corrective, the second preventative. As a corrective measure, depoliticize science funding. This includes, among other things, removing EDI requirements. As a preventative measure, entrench a culture of free speech, which is the best defense against bad ideas. All recent manias, from gender medicine to EDI, could have been avoided had they been openly debated from the start. I propose an Office of Devil's Advocacy to fund evidence-based arguments against emerging scientific fads. This builds in viewpoint diversity and ensures that counterpoints are officially aired. Everyone benefits as ideas are defended, sharpened, and refined. I am happy to expand on any of these points during questions, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be heard. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Right on time. We will now proceed to Professor Patanjali Hampati from McGill University. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Ms. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me. My name is Patanjali Kampampati. I'm a professor of chemistry at McGill University, working in the field of ultrafast laser science. Why is that important? Because this field in which I work is characterized by excellence. 3 Nobels have been awarded. Hopefully there will be more, hopefully for people like me or my colleagues. But that's not important. What matters is the pursuit of excellence, and that's my main focus. The views I share here are only my own and do not represent the university. I was born in India to poor parents. My father, through determination, earned an engineering degree and gave me the chance to pursue science abroad. I emigrated first to the United States and then to Canada, which is now my scientific home. This background makes me sensitive to ideas of privilege and resources. They matter in life. But science cannot be reduced to social engineering. Its integrity rests on ability, discovery, and results wherever they may arise. Science is not redistribution. The purpose of science is not to spread jobs evenly or to promote identity-based rewards. Its purpose is to drive human progress. Every great advance came from enabling those with insight and skill to make discoveries, from thermodynamics powering the Industrial Revolution to quantum mechanics, both of which are my fields, giving rise to semiconductors, lasers, and quantum computing. And when these discoveries happened, all of humanity benefited. If we argue that science serves equality, it is not by lowering standards, but by raising the human condition through knowledge and innovation. Science as a beacon, merit, fairness, and equality. Not every child will become a scientist, just like not every child will become an athlete in the NBA. Giving out research positions and professorships, promotions, and funding based upon external characteristics does not help the enterprise of science. As a path forward, I propose that science should be administered based upon principles of MFE, merit. Science must reward those who produce discoveries and knowledge. Fairness. Evaluations must be free from ideological filters, instead focusing on rigor and originality. Equality. Everyone should have a chance to compete, but success must depend upon results, not demographics. If we stay true to MFE, then even those born far from privilege can rise, as did I. Observed facts. Even 15 years ago, faculty positions were sometimes restricted to women candidates, or those who even self-identify as women. On more than a dozen hiring committees in chemistry and physics, I saw that the vast majority of applicants, often 90%, were men, with a large share being Asian men. That reality in the applicant pool was not reflected in the policies guiding hiring, promotion, and awards in the course of my 20 years. In the past, women who happened to be scientists, such as Marie Curie, and women in my field, Ursula Keller in Switzerland, Margaret Murnane in the U.S., succeeded because their work demanded recognition. Today, however, some faculty slots are created explicitly for optics rather than for excellence, undermining trust for both men and women. Young people see this clearly, even if they cannot articulate it openly. Politicization of science is not unprecedented. My colleague Anna Krylov at USC, a distinguished scientist, has written eloquently about the perils of politicizing science, drawing upon her experience growing up in the Soviet Union. Her warning was simple. When ideology dictates who can enter science, discovery itself is diminished. Canada should take that warning seriously. The cost of misplaced criteria. The true cost of misplaced criteria is not merely extra paperwork, it is the slowing, halting, or even reversal of scientific progress. The consequences for Canada's economy, security, and quality of life would be catastrophic. History gives us a clear warning. Once again, in the Soviet Union, ideology overruled biology under Trofim Lysenko. Genetics was declared politically unacceptable, and an entire generation of discoveries was lost, farmers starved, and Soviet science never regained its standing. When we politicize science, we risk repeating those mistakes. We rob not only the scientist, but every young person.
Sorry for interrupting. If you can please wind up.
Yeah,
your time.
We rob every young person who might be inspired by their examples. I want to end on a note of inspiration. I'll be brief here. Feynman once said we should fall in love with some activity and do it. For me, that was science, and I want the next generation to have the same chance to fall in love with discovery and carry it further than I could. Canada can make that possible, but only if we remember science is not a social program. It is humanity's greatest engine of progress. In these times of change, Canada should pursue this mechanism of progress. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Julien Larigue. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Merci, mesdames et messieurs les membres du comité.
Thank you. My name is Gérald Laligue. I'm a university professor in sociology at Laval. Now, I'm also working in the scientific field, research on the scientific field. I've been working many years now on evaluating how sciences are ranked internationally. Since 23, I've led a research project on the distribution of the funding by NSERC, and this with the results that it gives. I might recall that following my colleague Vincent Larivière, who was ahead of me, there is no objective definition of excellent scientific excellence. It's useless to try to look for one. The criteria, in fact, happens to be to distinguish good researchers from bad. There's already different points of view how we define excellence, and to define excellence will, of course, determine who gets the money and who doesn't. However, to decide who gets this money, it all depends on social and political basis. Many colleagues have contrary opinion or conflicting definitions. We could talk about it for years. And we could also have criteria that are based on fact. How much money is granted, and within the system we could do this in a more intelligent fashion, more rationally, if we knew ahead of time how the system works. How do evaluation panels analyze, and what weight do they give to the factors? Thanks to transparency and wanting to go forward, I've since 1923 to take a look at how many were refused, how many were accepted over the last 20 years. Given statistical analysis and along with other members of other panels composed of professors, what would be the probability of getting a grant or not? To give you an overview, there are two criteria that are primary. How many grants have you previously received? And the prestige of the university for which you teach. If you're at McGill or Toronto or UBC, you'll have a better chance of getting a grant than if you were at Three Rivers, Trois-Rivières, or Sudbury. This is particularly true for certain fields. Management, economics, these are primary criteria. In other cases, anthropology. So it's very important to know that what discipline we're speaking of. This example, this is not my opinion. This is object rather of a lot of research. It's based on three things. And it's been empirically shown that the concentration of funds is not beneficial for the entire system of research. It's concentrated on a small group of university specialists. It's a problem. If you received a grant before, you're likely to get another one. Now, the problem is that the request is not distanced from the CV. So, depending on, not even depending on the discipline, the evaluation of the project is based on the evaluation of the CV. And where does the researcher practice? This should be implemented so that we can proceed in a more rational fashion. And in fact, often a recommendation of the committee is not really accepted because they are deemed to have perhaps failed in their interpretation of the rules for procedure or protocols. It would be naive to think that all we have to do is change the rules or processes for SRSR. And my last point, in order to understand how the system is working, we need empirical data. And I would insist that the SRSR share their information with others.
For the first round of questioning, and we will begin with MP Baldinelli for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Horstman, you authored a chapter in the book, The War on Science. And within that chapter, you mentioned we need to renormalize a culture of liberal science on campus, especially with respect to radical new ideas like equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI. You make the statement in that chapter, universities, the institutions that should be at the very heart of liberal science, are increasingly ignoring these rules. In your testimony today, you talk about your recommendations, and two of them about how we can depoliticize science funding and entrenching a culture of free speech. I think that touches upon diversity viewpoints. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. I think with respect to some of the problems with renormalizing a culture of free exchange of ideas, in that case I was referring to probably Jonathan Rauch's rules for liberal science. And that is, the first rule is that knowledge is provisional. No one has the final say. Okay, so that's very important. In his first book, he articulated or uses an example, estimates for the size of the universe and how that's changed year by year, century after century. At any time, can you be sure you've got the right answer? Of course not. Everything is open, everything is contestable. Nothing is beyond question or debate. And as I mentioned, that rule is being broken because people will say such and such a controversial topic is beyond debate. The other rule is that no one has personal authority. So no one can use their personal or identity status to wall off knowledge from other people. It's universal. So that means, as I mentioned in my testimony today, that if you do an experiment right, it should be replicable by someone who speaks a different language on a different continent centuries in the future. And that, too, is being attacked in the academy through things like you have to acknowledge lived experience of that particular person or group. It's inaccessible to others. So that's defying the universal principle of knowledge and of science. You'll also hear things like an ethnic way of knowing, right? That, again, is defying the universal principle that knowledge is accessible to everyone, regardless of identity. It exists in the ether, and it's universal.
It was interesting. In your opening statement, you'd mentioned about a colleague telling you, you should stop talking about EDA. People had been talking and they were worried about what you were thinking. And then you mentioned this one quote, and you said, fear leads to censorship. And within your chapter in the book, you said, a scientist at another Canadian university told you, I have made my peace with EDI. I will lie about my most deeply held beliefs or convictions on paper in order to get funding. So in a sense, you're almost having a bit of academic dishonesty simply to avoid that notion of censorship to get the funding. And I don't think that serves the institution well.
Doesn't serve anyone well. If we are now admitting openly, well, maybe not openly, but in private at least, that many of us are just saying what we know needs to be said, even if it deeply offends our cherished beliefs and values of things like openness, the universality of knowledge, things that are deeply offensive to us. If people are saying, I'm going to just say things that counter that in order to get funding so I can continue my research program, this is very dangerous, and I think because we have to acknowledge what that might do to an individual person who accepts that they've lied, right? I think it diminishes their soul in a way, right? They're now weaker and less able to stand up and resist further incursions. I mean, when you start lying, when do you stop?
To your point, and when you are honest and do applications, you mentioned in that chapter in the book of Dr. Kembam-Patti having a grant application rejected because you talked about meritocratic principles in hiring. I was just wondering if you could expand on that, Doctor.
It would be my pleasure. In an NFRF competition in 2019, it was the first time I had to write a DEI section, and the concept of people not having all the same resources or even experiencing racism and sexism or ageism is not only not distant from me. I've experienced all these things ad nauseum, but that means I don't want that idea to propagate in any way, shape, or form. So I'm not going to judge a woman or a man or a gay or a black or a straight by anything other than, can you do quantum mechanics? Well, I said, great. I welcome everyone into my group. All you have to do is geeky enough to want to do the quantum mechanics and build lasers. I mean, I have 5 women in my group of 15 men, and they're all geeky women physicists too, just like the geeky men. We're all the same.
What happened? That application was rejected.
The application never made it to scientific review because it was purely rejected on EDI grounds. And I simply said, I've experienced more than you have probably. Having said that, that's why I believe in merit, fairness, and equality.
Thank you.
Time is up. We will now proceed to MP Rana for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, all the participants. My question is to you, Dr. Horstman. I would love to mention your recent article, Woke Hermit Kingdom, Canada Doubles Down on EDI, as you mentioned. So my question is, you argue many EDI practices are ineffective or even harmful. But do you explore under what conditions or designs EDI has succeeded?
Well, what I think I need to explain something here. I think it's important to talk about what's called the Mott and Bailey tactic. So with respect to EDI, we see a lot of this. So as I've experienced and demonstrated today, EDI generally involves sweeping programs of racial discrimination, compelled speech, censorship. But when people start to complain about it and it comes under fire, what happens is that the EDI advocates retreat to positions like, well, it's just about making sure that we have good experimental design so that seatbelts are designed accounting for women. That's got nothing to do with EDI. That has long been good experimental practice, and that's why you just have to have lots of rigor, review, contestation of different ideas so that you can seek out and find error and remove it. So, so I don't know of any cases where EDI has been beneficial.
Over these 2 past committee meetings, we have heard from various professionals and scholars of how beneficial EDI has been at ensuring all Canadians are on a fair playing field. Throughout your time in academia, what possible negative consequences over EDI have you witnessed?
Negative consequences of EDI have been legion. I mean, I expressed some of them there, but I can provide more. For example, my department was awarded what's called an Inclusive Excellence Program. Now, this is an Orwellian term that just means we're going to restrict it to certain limited groups. It's not including, it's excluding, and you're limiting the applicant pool severely. So here's what happened. Our university decided that in the wake of 2021, they wanted to hire 6 black scholars and 6 Indigenous scholars. Our department was awarded one of the positions for an Indigenous scholar. Upon hearing this, a colleague of mine from outside the department related to me that they knew of a really good postdoc in the United States who was black, and it would be really good to get this person to apply. Of course, I had to tell my colleague that this person is excluded because they have the wrong skin color. This is the in and out daily experience of EDI policies. They're discriminatory, exclusionary, and they are, I see no good in them. They're dark.
Madam Chair, I have still time? Can I ask another question?
You have 2 minutes.
Oh, thank you.
2 minutes.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Laurie, my question is to you. In your experience, have you noticed significant differences in how research funding applications are evaluated across disciplines?
Oui. Les demandes de subventions sont évaluées de façon très différente.
Yes, they're evaluated quite differently from university to university, and this is why I insisted that changing the criteria at the funding agency would not serve much purpose, because the committee is master of who gets what and how they interpret the rules. Basically, if you haven't published in a prestigious publication, you are not going to be considered. And if you've received some before, well, you have much greater chance of getting it. Changing the rules demands a lot of discipline, and people do not have an opportunity to publish in one journal or another. Therefore, the project should be evaluated anonymously, so that the content is analyzed and not the CV and the past history of grants from the author.
Oh, thank you. So what do you think drives these variations?
À l'histoire des disciplines, à la manière dont la qualité et l'excellence sont définies d'un espace.
Well, it all depends how excellence is identified or defined from one institution to another. The definitions are very different. Each discipline, when we hire professors, of course, not only just granting, there's always some differences of opinion, but consensus emerges. If you have a good CV, for example, in economics, well, I don't want to go discipline by discipline, but it's if you're published in a good journal, published in the US of A, that's it. You have the advantage. If you publish elsewhere, well, it's not as valued as if it were in a more prestigious American journal.
I'll proceed to MP Blanchet-Bianco for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins qui sont avec.
Thank you. I want to thank the witnesses who are with us. Mr. Lelegue, you have shown that at the University of Toronto and BC have received 44% and 34% of the granting funds. So it's basically depends on the actual establishment, teaching establishment. Well, thanks for the question, but it's very complicated, because the people who receive the grants, whether they're in Toronto or Vancouver, will have a greater advantage than somebody from Trois-Rivières. So prestige is not necessarily the only one, but the CV counts as well. And it's very, very difficult why these individuals get more grants. It could be their excellence, the quality of their work, because it would be the same in all disciplines, but it's not the same. Prestige is much more important for some disciplines than others. To say that Toronto recipients are just experts in economics is not necessarily useful, but the prestige of economics for that institution makes it that the same players get the grants. It's a concentration of funds going to the universities. Well, 3, McGill, Toronto, and get $20,000 more per grant other than the rest. So this is somewhat domino situation. You have some people who are disadvantaged at the beginning of their careers depending on where they are teaching. Well, it's cumulative as well. It's the candidates who ask for a specific sum, and in large prestigious universities, believing their own merit of excellence, ask for much more money. The request made by the smaller institutions is less, and it's a lot easier to hand out one check than 15. Well, BC, Toronto, and McGill, are we not shortchanging Francophone institutions or requiring candidates for granting? Well, the dichotomy is not necessarily linguistic in basis. Anglophone universities are not in the prestige or elite group, get more money regardless. And if we base it, some are professional grant seekers. Urban versus rural. There's a very important distinction here as to the capacity to get a grant. The fewer grants you get, the less money the institution has as well. Well, 80% of the funding goes to the 3 elite or the 15 universities, and the majority of those 15 top-class universities are Anglophone. So pressure and difficulty occurs more in Francophone-based universities. Not necessarily. One has to distinguish between the language of work in their universities, and everyone has to speak in either English or French, depending on the disciplines. Scientific, it's English. If they're Francophone, Lusophone, Hispanic, they are disadvantaged. But Francophone institutions, as institutions, are not disadvantaged vis-a-vis English counterparts. But certain universities, UQAM, for example, does very, very well at the SHRC. It's a public university, and it's quite different from McGill, for example. It's true that the top-class elite institutions are Anglophone, but it's not based on the fact of the linguistic distinctions. Well, you're saying that we should take a look at the success rates and why, and the failure rates as well, or refused grants. Why is it essential to have this kind of data to understand the success of the program or the system? Well, in the brief that I submitted earlier, without knowledge of who is applying, it's almost impossible to figure out rationally which factors lead to a decision financially. Do people from Toronto have a better chance than people from UQAM, for example? I couldn't give you an answer. We don't know how we could arrive at a list of final grants if we compare the two. Okay, 50 people here and 75 there. The benefit.
Time is up. Maybe you'll have an opportunity in the second round. We will start our second round with MPD Ryder. You will have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for being here today. Dr. Horstman, you come from Laurier, right in my community. I'm MP for Kitchener Centre. Welcome. Thank you. My question will be directed to you, one of. I'm going to start with a direct quote between you and a conversation with a colleague. You should stop talking about EDI, my colleague suggested to me over lunch. You've got a family, he said. Think about your kids, he implored. I'll admit that my heart rate increased because it sounded a lot like, nice family you got there. Would be a shame if you were no longer able to provide for them. I've got to tell you, my heart is racing right now at the mere thought of having to choose free speech over providing for my family. That, coupled with DEI incentives, foster an administrative culture that provides securing political aligned funding over protecting academic and open inquiry. You believe that science thrives when scientists are guided by evidence and motivated by curiosity. I ask, is the Canadian scientific community thriving right now with the personal and political pressure to conform to these ideologies instead of fostering true democratic free speech in academia?
Well, thank you for the question. No, I don't think that science is thriving in Canada. And now it's not just EDI initiatives. I think it's politicization more broadly that is hindering it. As I said, I think if you're not free to speak, that has an impact that emanates out into the culture of science, so that people just tend to be hesitant. It makes you diminished. It makes you less experimental. You don't take risks. You just sit back and become small and just do some derivative work so you don't make waves, and hopefully you can just kind of be relatively, keep your head down and get through. That's increasingly the culture of science in Canada.
I agree, thank you. That's a great segue actually into Professor Kamambati. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Excellent. You're an award-winning Canadian scientist, and you've been refused 2 federal government grants on the grounds of lack of diversity. Your work explores cutting-edge laser science, a field that spans from everything from telecom to medicine, and you believe Canada could actually become a world leader in that field. But your applications for the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council, NSERC, was turned down because the council said, in quotes, the equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations in the application were deemed insufficient. When we're not focused on research itself, cutting-edge research like you're working on in your facility, that Canada can actually become the lead on, and we focus instead on DEI, what's the economic impact of that, especially in tech hubs where I'm from, like Kitchener?
It's a wonderful question. I thank you for asking that. I'm very thrilled you asked that, because there's often a misconception that you fund science like you fund education, and it makes people happy and nice and good things. You know, everyone feels nice about themselves, like kindergarten. No. Science is the driver of economic progress, first and foremost. Absolutely true. There is no economic progress without science. Otherwise, we're just digging for gold or coal. That's why we can have quantum computers. That's why we have encryption. That's why we have MRI machines. It's because of science. So if we stop this progress by giving resources to people who are less qualified, and it is absolutely necessarily the case that when you use DEI, you are discriminating. And you're discriminating and following in the footsteps of intellectual racism from Britain in the 1880s, which was actually very popular. And in anthropology, perhaps my colleague could know, you could get tenure in racism. It was a thing. I just got tenure in racism. Woo! So that now we have, I just got tenure in DEI. It's the same thing. Like in communism, they politicized science to such an extent that the Ukrainians starved and cannibalized each other because they didn't believe in capitalist genetics. So the opportunity cost is astronomical, and Canada was a leader. One of my heroes here is Dwayne Miller at Toronto, and he was a leader, and he's retirement age almost. He'll be angry if I say that, but I want to follow in his footsteps. And he was my inspiration. Do I care that he's from India or China, or he's actually from Manitoba? But, you know, that's fine. So...
sorry for interrupting. Time is up.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Now we will proceed to MP Noor Mohammed for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, MP Noor Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This has been a very interesting conversation in many ways. And I have to say, as somebody who has gone most of my life trying to make sure that I was elected for things on the basis of merit and not on the basis of where my parents were born or the color of my skin or the language that I may speak at home, I think it's really important that we frame the conversation in a way that that actually reminds people that the initial thinking around EDI was that we would ensure that we were getting the best of the best, and that in that we ensured that there were people that reflected the diversity of the country, not that you would hire people or put someone into a role because they checked off a box. And so I want to start, Professor Orson, with asking you, your colleagues who may be considered diversity hires, do you think they produce less good scholarship than you?
I don't think so. I don't know that there would be any diversity hires that I would know of at this point. We've hired some, but in my department or people in my area, I am not aware of any.
You would not say that, or would you say, I guess I want to make sure I don't put words in your mouth, would you say that the application of EDI policy has led to less qualified people hired, producing less good research?
That would be a logical conclusion.
No, but your view.
Yes, I think because if you reduce the applicant pool, necessarily.
Have you seen hires who are diversity hires around you or in the world in which you operate that have produced less good scholarship? And if so, can you give me an example?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I can't
okay.
give you an example.
One of the things that I'm quite concerned about is that we should not be putting ourselves in a situation where anyone should think that less good research is being done, that science is somehow diminished as a result of people being hired who reflect diverse communities or populations. Would you say that that is what is happening?
Yes, if you are hiring not for merit, right? If you're hired, yeah.
You've just told me that you have not seen any examples where the quality of the work has been diminished as a result of EDI. So that's what I'm trying to understand. So you've just said that
percent at a time.
You've just said that you have not seen examples where the quality of research is poorer by so-called diversity hires. But then you're saying that scholarship is diminished. So I guess I'm curious about how you square that circle.
Oh, just as I mentioned, if you reduce the applicant pool, so it's a statistical thing. If you have 100 applicants, and in our case go down to less than one, we didn't have any applicants. Are you going to get more applicants? Is it likely, probabilistically, to get better applicants from 100 or one? It's a simple.
So I guess the question, I will go back to my original question then. Is the issue the principle of EDI, or is it the application of EDI in the current context?
I mean, the principle.
So the principle that we should broaden the pool as much as possible to have the most qualified people apply is problematic?
No, I like that, but that's not.
So
EDI.
That was the intention of EDI in its existing framing.
I don't know if that's true.
So there's a study done by Northwestern University which looked at 90 studies across a number of countries that involved 174,000 applicants in academia to jobs and faculty in a number of Western countries. When names of racialized people or criteria that were able to assess diversity were put into the applications, applicants of color had to apply to 50% more jobs on the basis of equal credentials than non-diverse populations. When the study was, when the names were altered, the field was also equalized in terms of people being now, people of color now seeing that they were being called back at the same rate as people whose names were not racialized. Do you think that's a concern that we should be thinking about or looking at?
Sure, I suppose. I haven't seen this study, but I will say that's sure. But I know that studies like this. There's a very famous one with respect to applicants for a lab technician, where they use different names. I think it was more along the lines of female versus male, and they showed or claimed to show that women were discriminated against.
5 minutes. It was a 5 minute.
He said it was a 6-minute round.
No, it was a 5 minute. So we will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonker for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Madame la Présidente, prochaine question pour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In an article that you published on the 11th of September, 55% of research chairs are inaccessible to white men, whereas the 33% for racialized individuals. So we're making some fairly heavy efforts to get the right color into the position.
The CRC Chairs program you're referring to has, again, it's really designed, there are tables that have quotas based on race, sex, a whole bunch of different factors, and there really seems to be no brakes on this process. I think in that case that you mentioned, I believe the target by 2029 was 22% racialized, which means non-white. That stands currently at 32%, I believe. A year or two ago, it was maybe 29. It just keeps going up. And I still see positions that are exclusionary of white men. Maybe you have an out if you claim some sexual difference or some queer identity, but really, it continues. This discriminatory exclusion continues.
Merci de confirmer tout ça. Professeur Kamapati.
Thank you, Professor Kamapati. Your opinion has been published widely, and you refused a grant when your team didn't have sufficient diversity. Do you think that they're less excellent because they're less diversified?
I'm happy to answer this question. Merci beaucoup for asking it. And to the broad question, I can say with absolute certainty, the practice of DEI ruins science, doesn't make it a little bit worse. It destroys competence and capability, and you take away positions from the more competent and you give it to the less competent or to the incompetent. In sports, you never give positions based upon DEI. Why? Because you'll lose a game. And the game that we're trying to win here is the advancement of human civilization through science. It happens by the best people who are absolutely committed. My best PhD student was a white woman who's Swiss, and she's mini-me, and she's a Swiss woman. So it doesn't matter. She was the best person, and now she's a professor in Germany. But I've also seen women be given positions for which no men are allowed, and they're clearly less qualified. They got tenure and so forth, with clearly less qualified.
Yeah, please. Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. And now we will have 2 minutes for the Conservatives and 2 minutes for the Liberals. Okay, so we will have, next we will have Mr. Mahal for 2 minutes. Mr. Mahal, please go ahead. You will have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start with Dr. Kamala Batty. Since we are out of time, I have to be limited on the question. You mentioned earlier in your testimony that politicization of science is diminishing research and discoveries. That was your gist of. So my question to you is, are we heading into being into a socialistic regime under the mandatory requirements of EDI? Being pushed by the left politics? And what are the dangers of that trend?
Thank you for your question, I can say absolutely true. What you've said, and as you've summarized, is 100% accurate. There has been institutional capture by leftist ideologues who represent maybe 10% of Canada, and probably 90% disagree. Not just conservatives, probably liberals, centrists. Most people disagree. Most scientists disagree, but they don't want to say anything. They're afraid to say anything for losing funding, like myself or Jeff. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I would say to the point that these programs fundamentally demoralize everyone. People who might go in. Children say, I can't go into science. My sons say, I can't go into science because it's only for women. My sons say that. They're McGill students.
My next question is, we heard from across the panel that EDI in principle was meant to achieve different results. So if the EDI is not achieving the results that it was supposed to achieve, should we not stop it, in your opinion?
Absolutely, because I think, as the great economist Milton Friedman once said, you do not judge a policy based upon its intentions, you judge it based on its outcomes. And then you, the politicians, are empowered to make changes. And that's how democracy works. And that's how project management works. That's how science works. We get input and we change our mind.
Now we will end our panel with MP McKelvey for 2 minutes. MP McKelvey, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Horstman, if an institution recognizes the rich, diverse makeup of the Canadian population and the contribution of these communities to our history and the Canadian way of life, is that problematic?
I don't really understand what that means, to acknowledge a rich
value of the organization to embrace diversity. Is that problematic?
Or if we're talking about a university, I think it is. I think a university should have a very clearly defined mandate. It's about pursuing knowledge, pursuing truth. I mean, why do you have to embrace political acknowledgments of different ethnic groups in your country? I mean, I don't think that's a particularly important thing for a university to do. And as we can see, it can move you off mission.
Dr. Kambathi, your thoughts on that?
Yes, I actually have a prepared statement because I anticipated this. Wonderful question. Point 3, my final point, stop social engineering in science. Science is not activism. Scientists are trained to test hypotheses and to discover, not to redistribute privilege. Whether that should even happen is another question. We're not communists, are we? Burdening research and ideological mandates distracts from discovery, erodes public trust. If science is left free, it benefits all of humanity, and these benefits will naturally flow to all people.
Would it surprise either of you that the Conservative Party's constitution recognizes the rich, diverse makeup of the Canadian population and the contribution of these communities to our history and the Canadian way of life as a statement?
Would it surprise me? Not in the least, because I think in politics you can talk about diversity, and in teaching you can talk about diversity, maybe in police service, because you interact with humans. In science, no, I mean, maybe some people who interact with humans, I don't. And all the people in my field, we're all machine people. Even the women are machine people. Everyone's a machine person. There's no person. So we're just there to do the work.
Is there interaction with humans?
Yes, go ahead.
So I would really thank the witnesses for appearing before the committee. If there is something you want to bring it to the committee's attention and were not able to bring it today, you can do a written submission. Yes, Mr. Baldinelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a quick question to the clerk on the status of the invitations to the Tri-Council. I understand they were invited during the last Parliament, and there were technical difficulties, so they didn't have an opportunity to appear. So I was wondering if the Tri-Council members have agreed to appear and if we can schedule them in. I mean, in fact, we've got more witnesses that, I mean, we could extend the hearings if that's the will of the committee.
They have been extended the invitation and they have accepted for October 1st. So they are
October 1st?
Yes, they are scheduled for October 1st.
Okay.
So with that is the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting. Okay, the meeting is adjourned.